title, RDI Webinar Series. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Accessibility Resolutions for the New Year, Best Practices for Inclusive Design. I am joined today by two of my incredibly wonderful, thoughtful, expert colleagues. I am joined today by Charles Heiser, who is our Digital Accessibility and Assistive Technology Specialist. And I am also joined by Alyssa Smith, who is our Accessibility Evangelist at AudioEye. And before we even get started, let's get started with what is AudioEye. AudioEye is a leading digital accessibility platform that helps companies and content creators meet the highest standards of accessibility. Our technology and a team of experts help you find and fix accessibility issues, navigate legal compliance, and monitor for ongoing accessibility. Our experts include people with disabilities who test our customers' sites and participate in training initiatives that raise awareness on digital accessibility. And we also use their critical feedback to improve our product. Today, we are going to hear all about accessibility resolutions for the new year. And before we get started, we need to talk about accessibility, what accessibility features we have for today's webinar. So we are using the Zoom platform, which provides automatic captioning. So you will have to press the button at the bottom of the screen that says CC to turn on the automatic captioning. We also encourage you to save all of your questions, jot them down, write them on the Zoom platform on a section that says Q&A. This is going to be a space for you to learn, for you to ask questions. So whenever a question comes up, make sure that you submit it on the Q&A form. I also want to go over the schedule for today. So we are going to have two rounds for today's webinar. The first round is going to be an overview of accessibility standards and guidelines. And our second round is going to be about those actionable things, those best practices for inclusive design. And let me go ahead and introduce myself because some of you may not know me. My name is Mariela Paulino, and I am talking to you from Connecticut. I'm the Advocacy and Social Media Manager at AudioEye. So as you can imagine, I'm all about the marketing, being in front of a camera, talking to all of you about what AudioEye is, what our product is, and why it's so awesome. My audio description, I am a Hispanic woman. I am wearing a purple jacket because AudioEye is all about the purple. I have long black hair, and my background is a gradient that is purple and green. And I would love to bring my colleagues to the stage. So I'm going to start with Charles Heiser, who is our Digital Accessibility and Assistive Technology Specialist. And then we will move on to Alyssa Smith, who is our Accessibility Evangelist. So Charles, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charles Heiser. As Mariella mentioned, I'm the Digital Accessibility and Assistive Technology Specialist that is with AudioEye. I am speaking to you from Southwest Ohio, where it is very, very windy today. I have a nice button-down shirt on, and I am a white male with short brown hair, also sharing the background, the purple to green gradient background that Mariella mentioned. Alyssa?
Hey, everybody. My name is Alyssa Smith. I am the Accessibility Evangelist with AudioEye, coming to you today from Woodstock, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. And I am a white woman with long brown hair, wearing a black top today. And my background is same as my colleagues, green and purple with the AudioEye logo up in the corner. And my preferred gender pronouns are she and hers. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you, Alyssa. I love how you just bring kind of that calm energy into today's webinar, which we need. Alrighty. Let's go ahead into the first round for today's conversation. Round one is going to be all about an overview of the accessibility standards and guidelines. And I'll start with the first question. I'll start with you, Elisa, but can you give us an overview of what the law says and what it means?
Absolutely. The most important one for us to cover today, I think, is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was passed in 1990. It was a landmark civil rights law. It prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life. Title III of the ADA addresses businesses specifically. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in places of public accommodation. So that includes restaurants, private schools, stadiums, office buildings, and anything else you can think of where the public might gather. Businesses are required to make reasonable modifications to include people with disabilities. And based on recent guidance from the DOJ, the Department of Justice, it's clear that businesses of all sizes are expected to meet accessibility standards like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in order to comply with the ADA. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is known as WCAG or WCAG or WCAG, and it's created and ratified by the World Wide Web Consortium, and it's the de facto international standard for web accessibility. It outlines in its current version 78 testable success criteria. The current version is 2.1, and we're expecting a new version at the end of April, according to W3C, and that will be 2.2, and it will add a few more new success criteria. Charles, do you want to give us a little more detail about WCAG?
Yeah, sure. So WCAG, broadly speaking, as Elisa mentioned, are the accessibility guidelines, sort of the standard for the industry, if you will. They are composed by the W3C and contain 78 testable criteria that are organized under technically 5 principles, but 4 testable principles and 13 guidelines, under each of which are a group of criteria that, despite your coding language, despite your technology that you're using, whether you're on a mobile device or a laptop, you should be able to succeed. By which I mean, you should be able to devise a simple test for each of these criteria, and you will be able to do it no matter what kind of software or device you're using. The idea behind WCAG is to equalize websites, applications, documents for everybody who uses them. And to that end, each of the guiding principles that can be tested against spell an acronym, POUR. Each of these stand for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The idea behind each of these is if you're able to make everything on your website perceivable, that is to say, every user can find every piece of content or every major control. You can make it operable, which basically means no matter what you're using, just a keyboard, just a mouse, maybe a touch screen, maybe a combination of keyboard and mouse, maybe something more exotic like a foot keyboard or a puff and sip device. No matter what you use, your product will be operable. Understandable deals with the type of language and iconography that you use on your website. It also has criteria that help your design and your controls look and act the same way consistently across your site. And finally, robust, robust basically stands for making sure that your product is compatible with as many assistive technologies as possible. That is basically what WCAG is and why so many laws, both nationally and internationally, look to it as the standard for accessibility.
Thank you so much for that. It's absolutely fascinating to me that there are already so many laws. It's important these laws exist, and it's just about implementing them. And I want to transition over to the second question for this round. Why should people care? about accessibility? Why should people care about making their websites, their apps, and their experiences accessible? Charles, I'd love to start with you.
Well, honestly, Mariella, they should care because it's the right thing to do. I mean, it sounds harsh when you put it that way, but what I basically mean is everybody wants to be included, and everybody, I think the vast majority of us would agree, everybody deserves to have the same access to a product or a place or a service as everybody else. It then comes to the people who are attempting to make those places accessible to then step up and say, hey, these types of people are struggling to access your service. How can we change this so that more people get access to your product or can benefit from whatever you're selling or promoting or even just talking about? So if you look at it from a numbers perspective, there are 1 in 4 Americans these days, 26% as of earlier this year, who are disabled. If roughly a fourth of the American population does not have access to your website, does not have the ability to put items in the cart or complete a checkout process, doesn't have the ability to understand what your images might be showing them, or just feels less included than their more able-bodied counterparts, so to speak, then you could eventually wind up losing out on a lot of customers. It is important to gain experience and learn which types of content on your digital platform you can then begin to look at to see how accessible you might be. Mariella, do you have anything else you'd like to ask on this?
I'd love to pose that same question over to Elisa. So, Elisa, why should people care about accessibility? Why should people care about making their websites, apps, and experiences accessible?
Charles did a great job of sort of talking about that, that human aspect of making sure that we're doing the right thing as business people, as creators. One way you can do that, is using universal design principles, which means creating products that are accessible to people with a wide range of abilities. So not necessarily just people with disabilities, but applying those principles means that products are going to be compatible with assistive technology, but also it makes products more usable so that assistive technology may not be required in every case. So it's really about making things better for everyone. We all have the possibility of becoming disabled in one way or another through an accident or illness or even aging. So think about you break your wrist or your arm and you're unable to use your mouse, you may have to navigate by keyboard instead. Or if you are holding a sleeping baby and you don't want to disturb the newborn, you may have to make your phone adapt to one single-handed use so that you can operate your phone with one hand. Or if you are born with maybe an arm impairment where you can't use your arm, you may have to employ a switch or another type of input device. So we're designing not only for disability, but also ourselves in different situations or in different, sort of maybe temporary times of our lives. As we get older, we're all going to acquire some type of disability, even if it's just your sight going as you age. So we all have a way to benefit from this. So don't just think about it as you're doing it for someone else. Think about it as you're doing it for your loved ones and for yourself.
I would love to have you talk a little bit, Elisa, on a point. I've heard you talk about that I think is really important for our audience members, which is the concept of curb cuts. Can you explain them a little bit, please?
Sure. Curb cuts are a good example of universal design. They were originally made for people with disabilities who are using a wheelchair or are using a walker or crutches, and it makes it easier to get up onto the curb. But they're used today by everyone, kids with skateboards or bicycles, moms with strollers, people with shopping carts. And so that became something that was an expected feature of our everyday lives in the built environment.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Now that we've talked about the laws and guidelines, I would like to move on into those actionable steps, into those best practices for inclusive design, because that's the thing I love about AudioEye. It's all about solutions and being able to provide solutions. So my first question, now that we have gone into round 2, is how do we build with accessibility in mind? How do we get started? At least I'd love to continue with you for that question.
I think, how do you get started? Start before you start. Before you start, add accessibility as a baseline requirement for any digital project. That will give you a framework to educate yourself on those users' needs. You can learn about user needs and share information about user needs with your stakeholders using personas, which are a great design tool. You can find really good accessibility personas from a book called A Web for Everyone by Sarah Horton and Whitney Quisenberry. I'm sure you can find it online. You have to be able to understand those needs. You also want to be able to document your intended experiences for those users for your development team. So you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can add additional use cases or add annotations to the wireframes about how you expect those people to interact and what responses you expect from your interfaces. Also ensure that your developers are informed on accessibility, how to code accessibly. Do they understand the different attributes that are required to make their interfaces accessible? And another great way is to test your design with people who use assistive technology. You can test your end product with real users, but understand that people with disabilities don't all use assistive technology in the same way. So you want to have a wide variety of users if you decide to do user testing. An example of that is just a Mac user uses the VoiceOver screen reader. A Windows user uses a JAWS screen reader. Those two users are not going to necessarily have exactly the same experience on your interface. So you want to sort of check both of those experiences to make sure you're being supportive of both.
That was incredibly useful. Charles, would you like to add anything to this question?
Yeah, sure. Speaking of using assistive technology in different ways. Okay, I had to adapt my presentation to use it entirely differently, to use it on a completely different device. So I am a good real world use case. What I would like to add to everything that Elisa said is that there are a lot of little things that you can begin to address when you begin to examine your properties for accessibility improvements that can be made. And it can be kind of hard to know where to begin. So when talking about changes that could be made easily and that would make a huge improvement for a wide array of people, not just those using assistive technologies, but people in general. I have 4 examples, but these are by far not the only ones. And depending on your personal needs, these may be already addressed, they may not be. They may need to be readdressed depending on redesigns of your marketing team or a new website in general. So the first one is semantic headings. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with visual headings. Anything that looks like a headline, it's big, it's bold, it's in your face, right? Semantic headings are sort of like that, but for software. They have multiple levels, and you can use these levels to differentiate how important content beneath the heading is. And semantic headings go exactly where your visual headings go. They are also arguably the most popular way screen reader users in particular will navigate a page, but screen readers aren't the only technology that uses them. Search engines will actually crawl, while crawling your text, can figure out what headings are in what orders, and thus figure out which information is most important to show anybody who searches your page. These are covered by the WCAG criterion 131, info and relationships. And truthfully, headings are covered depending on what you are doing with them by a couple of criterion. But in this aspect and how they relate the content to each other and how they are an influential design choice on your page, info and relationships is the best criterion to judge this type of heading use under. The second example is closed captioning. Now, I do want to make a point here and say that there's a difference between subtitles and closed captioning. Subtitles are only used for dialogue. You see them a lot used in translation, but they're only used to convey the dialogue a character might be saying. Closed captioning is a service or an attribute that is used to make the audio track as accessible as possible. So closed captioning also includes noises, will also include brief explanations of what might be happening off screen that maybe you're only hearing. They'll include background noises, just little things to try and get messages across to people who may be using closed captioning instead of being able to hear the audio. But whether you're talking about closed captioning or subtitles, this is another great example of universal design, which Elisa touched on earlier. Everybody uses these services. Everybody uses them while you're out, while you're watching TV. I mean, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people I know have them on all the time. It is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's a service that people almost expect now. Captions usually fall under 1.2.2 or 1.2.4, which is captions pre-recorded and captions live, respectively. They're basically the same thing, but there are two different criterion to judge pre-recorded content versus live content. The next example is alt text or alternative text, which is the text that you can embed in an image so that screen reader users and SEO crawlers can see what your picture is in words. They also will load if your image fails to load on anybody's device. The description of the image will load in its place, which is kind of cool. So one of the things you should probably think about then in your alt text is, what is the point of this picture? When you look at this picture, what is the first thing you see? That should be the first thing that's written into your alt text. If it's as simple as this is a white bear, then it's a white bear. But you could also say, this is a white bear standing in the snow on its hind legs. That paints a much more vivid picture. I would say 3 basic things to keep in mind while you're writing alt text is use sensory language if you can. For example, it's okay to say something like, it looks like the light is reflecting off the water. Like that's a sensory image you can put in your alt text. Or the coat seems fuzzy, for example, because you can see the textures of fabrics. So sensory language. The second one is keep it snappy. Basically, alt text should be a very bite-sized piece of information. And think about what matters most in the image. Like I said before, what is the point of your image? And in that snappy message, how can you convey that point in text? Alt text is covered by criterion 1.1.1 WCAG, which is non-text content, which is basically anything, any photo or image or video that is not text, or iconography in some cases too.
Or
finally,
fields.
Or form fields. Good point. Very true.
Yep, non-text content that requires a text label.
Yeah. The final example is visual focus indicators. Okay. Visual focus indicators, basically the easiest way to think about them is it is a mouse for people who don't use a mouse. It is the thing that a keyboard user can use to recognize where exactly their tab focus is on the screen as they use the tab key to navigate through, say, a menu bar. Or it's the thing a switch user could use to make sure that they are moving in the right direction, or they have made the successful jump to the next part of the page. Basically, WCAG says that it is, as much as possible, make it visible. WCAG actually only specifies keyboard users, but common practice is if it works with a mouse cursor and a keyboard cursor, you should try to test it with as much of technology combinations as you can get your hands on. But that should enable it to work with most assistive tech that will cross your website. Visual focus indicators are covered by WCAG 2.4.7 focus visible, which is the criterion that I basically just summarized. Just it does specifically say keyboard uses. Occasionally, though, there might be some additional actions needed depending on the kind of assistive technology.
Boom. I hope that everybody got all of that knowledge that was just dropped. I have one final question for the two of you, and I want to let our audience know this is a space for learning, so make sure that you are using the Q&A functionality in the question in the Zoom platform to ask your questions. And I would love for you both to be brief with this next question so that we can then go into our audience members. The last question for today's webinar is, how do we create a digital accessibility plan for an organization? Keyword, digital. Elisa, I would love to start with you.
Sure. Digital accessibility is not just the things that need to be fixed in your code. Sometimes that change needs to be in the way the org operates. So you might want to think about, regardless of the size of your organization, creating a digital plan should be a part of your new year's plans. As we've talked, we're here to talk about resolutions today. So using an accessibility maturity model is a great way to start because they clearly lay out measurements for several accessibility dimensions. Things like procurement of accessible software, or things like we talked about today, incorporating accessibility requirements into your design, into your testing. And I think we're going to be sharing some resources a little bit later that will give you those maturity models so you can check out what those dimensions are and how to measure them. As far as your website goes, free tools are a good way to get started. You can check out the scope of the issues you might have on your website, and that can kind of kickstart those organizational improvement plans. We also have some resources for that we will share with you. AudioEye has a great web scanner and a color contrast checker on our website that you can employ to see where things stand and make a plan to make some improvements. What about you, Charles?
Thank you, Elisa. Charles, I'd love to pose the same question to you.
As Elisa said, there are free tools that you can use to begin a website audit to basically point you in the right direction, see what fixes are most recommended. You can also employ people who are experts in using their assistive technology if you are especially interested in testing for assistive technologies in mind. Obviously, the people who will probably answer that kind of position will be disabled people because we use them in our daily lives. So in one aspect, you might be hiring developers and testers who have assistive tech abilities, but in another sense, you're also including the end users in the process, which is especially important because testers will probably have their own tips and tricks to get through certain situations, and users may not be as technical, or they may not be as technical with your specific product, because as we all know, sometimes it's easier to do something once you know the system you're working with. I would also finally add that there just isn't anybody who can do jobs like this, like the people who have the lived experience. Yes, there's training. Yes, there's education. Yes, there are licenses and certifications, but at the end of the day, somebody who has that lived touch, who can bring such a wealth of knowledge to the point where some of this stuff is just innate, is incredibly valuable. It was more valuable than I think a lot of people give credit to. So that's why AudioEye began explicitly asking people with disabilities and created the Alliance team as a way to bring on people with that innate knowledge into the testing process. Mariella, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the AudioEye Alliance team is a community-based initiative that brings people with disabilities to the forefront of our product development and advocacy. So what the Alliance team's mission is to remove all barriers to digital access at the most basic level. We offer individuals with disabilities various employment and engagement opportunities, including testing, quality assurance, training, and education. We are always recruiting new members. So if this is something that you're interested in, we encourage you to go to audioeye.com and look for the Alliance team. Alrighty, with that said, we are almost at time and we have got some time for some questions from our audience. And before we do that, I just want to share some closing thoughts here. So for the next steps, you will be receiving a feedback survey that will be sent via email. We also want to let you know that you will be receiving the recording. We also encourage you to connect with the Alliance team for future events that we have. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more. And now let's go over into our Q&A. So the first question we have for today is, what's the worst thing that can happen if you don't follow these accessibility guidelines or laws? I'd love to start with you, Elisa, on that question.
Sure. Lawsuit is definitely the most serious consequence of not following accessibility guidelines and not conforming with the law. If you do get a lawsuit and that judgment is against you, there could be money damages. There could be the need to repay the plaintiff's legal fees. There could be reputational harm to your business because they may publicize the fact that your website is not accessible when someone brings suit against you. Or it could start with someone lodging a complaint through maybe your social media or a customer service area, in which case you'd want to address it as quickly as possible to help support that user and be there for that user to prevent things escalating further.
Anything you want to add, Charles?
I would only add that the best way to stop the worst case scenario from happening is to include accessibility and inclusivity and usability principles into your pipeline as soon as possible and inject it everywhere as much as you can, because the more people who think about how to better your product in unexpected ways, the better your product is going to get. And as a bonus, you can look at it this way, as a bonus, you'll be following WCAG guidelines, which keeps you out of legal hot water. So I think Elisa did a really good job of summing up the worst experience, and that would be how you avoid it completely.
Love it. We have a follow-up question on how do I test my website for accessibility? I'm not sure if my company built our current website with accessibility in mind, and I'll be curious to see how accessible it is in its current state. We have a member of AudioEye in the backend who actually answered this question. At AudioEye, we have tools like the Web Accessibility Checker, which you can get online at audioeye.com. It uses automated issue detection software to check your site against accessible coding standards. So I highly encourage you to check it out. The next question we have is, how do you create an accessibility strategy for a mature product or organization? Which one of you wants to take that one on?
I'll take it. We just discussed accessibility maturity models, and that is definitely where you should start. If the company or the product or the property that you're discussing is mature or already in production or, out there live, the best thing to do is to begin trying to measure what might be inaccessible. And that way you have something over which you can lay your plan to increase accessibility for that product or business case or use case that you're talking about.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Charles?
No, accessibility maturity model is definitely your starting point here. There's all sorts of advice that we can give once you understand and have a baseline for measuring how your website is performing on accessibility metrics. But if you're uncertain and you're looking for initial information, start with that and start with AudioEye's web checker that we have on our website.
Love that. Thank you. And last question that we will be answering today. What is a good website accessibility score? We are at 92 with AudioEye. So let's translate that for our audience. I'd love to start with you, Lisa. What
Sure.
does 92 indicate?
So 92 indicates that you've got a lot of positive, good things going on your website. What I can't tell you, because I'm not looking at your results, is what you need to do to get it further. What AudioEye does is provide you with reporting that gives you what we've fixed, what might still be wrong that needs to be fixed in the source code, because AudioEye doesn't want to make visual changes to your website or changes that you might need to approve to get into your environment. So you definitely want to look at the source feedback report that you were given after your testing was completed so that you can make a plan to get your score higher by adding those source feedback fixes into your website.
Any insight, Charles?
Like Elisa said, a 92 represents a very good accessibility score overall. And at this point, it's just down to looking at the data, seeing what tweaks are left, what improvements are left to take that 92 all the way to a 98 or even higher. It sounds like that website in particular is probably fairly usable in its current state, but has additional issues which we could all address to make it even better, even higher.
All right, everyone, we are exactly at time. It is 5:45 p.m. And one of the things that I want to encourage all of you to do after today's webinar is stay connected. Accessibility is a journey. We are here to be your community, to be where you get answers to those hard questions. We are your partners in accessibility. You can follow us at AudioEye INC on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. That would be AudioEyeinc. You can also follow us on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/company/AudioEye-INC. So stay connected, let's learn together, and let's go on this incredible journey for accessibility. So that is all for you. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much to our panelists today. Thank you so much, Elisa. Thank you so much, Charles. Danny, who is the ghost in the machine, who has facilitated today's webinar. Thank you guys so much. And I will talk to you guys next time. Enjoy your Thursday. Bye.